Okay, so this is a brief little speck of time in my life that I'm talking about, and it's not in Elizabethtown. I live here, but in 2007, I was asked if I would like to teach a class at Raybrook Federal Correctional Institute. Now, I've been a teacher for 26 years. I had just completed my master's degree in creative writing at Johns Hopkins, and I said, yeah, it sounds like something I could do. I'd never been in a prison or worked in a prison, and I accepted the position for a semester. Now, to give you some reason why they wanted me, was every prisoner in the federal correctional system is required to be in an educational program. They have plenty of GED classes, but at Raybrook, they got some lifers with college degrees. So we're not going to give them like GED stuff. So I said I will teach a class in creative writing to those who already have finished their education or advanced education. And that was they hired me to do it. So if you're not familiar with FCI, as it's called, in Raybrook, it was originally built as the campus for the 1980 Olympics, and then they put up the razor wire. So in January of 2007, I showed up first for an orientation because they had to teach me how to teach in prison. And as a result, I learned something that I later referred to and wrote about, was called dressing for prison. I had to go through an orientation, fingerprinting, and the young man there who was telling me what I had to expect was, you cannot wear denim, khaki, or green. Those are the colors of the prison uniforms. We want you to wear any other color so that if you're taken hostage, you'll stand out. I'm like, okay, that's a great way to start. He said, we need to be able to see you if you are taken hostage. And then they taught me what to do if I was taken hostage. Keep your eyes down. Don't talk. Do what you're told. We'll get you out. Now I'm going to go to work. The first night I had the class, I went every Thursday night. It's the depth of winter in Raybrook, Lake Placid, snowing all the time. And I got there for the 6 o'clock class. And the first time I walked in, it's freezing cold outside. So I had to dress for the winter. I wore baggy clothing. They told me to wear a leather belt. I forgot to wear my leather belt. No jewelry, no makeup. I had to look as much like a nun as I could. So I'm going into an all-male prison. So I get there, they escort me into a classroom that's got to be 80 degrees. Because I don't know why, it's hot and it's freezing outside. So my idea was I'm teaching these guys about writing. And it looks like a regular classroom. And what they gave me before I went in was a thing called a body alarm. So that night when I went in, I'm not allowed to bring my purse. I'm not allowed to bring anything in. And they give me this body alarm that's about the size of a brick, kind of like a walkie-talkie. It had an antenna and a button for volume. I was supposed to hook it on my leather belt that I didn't wear. I forgot, because I don't normally wear leather belts. So I'm in front of the class. I walk in, and there's guys already there. These guys are my age. They're not youngsters. And they're all excited, and they're waiting. I'm like, I said to the young lady who was a guard who escorted me in, why are they here early? Class doesn't start till 6. She goes, it's liver night at the cafeteria. They don't like liver. And I went, oh, great. They're always going to be here early because they hate liver. So I get there, and I have a class of 20 guys. I look out, and I want to do a little introduction. So I thought I'd put a pithy quote from Mark Twain. I put my body alarm on the table. I turn around. I'm writing on the blackboard, and I realize I'm 10 feet away from the body alarm. It's supposed to be on my person. And I can feel 20 pair of eyes looking in the back of me. And I'm like, oh my God. And I very slowly turned around, put the chalk down, and picked that thing up and stuck it in my pocket. I had a jacket with a big pocket. I always wore a leather belt after that with my body alarm on. I did not want my students to write about why they were in jail. I only imagined it was horrible because these people were in for life. So I made them write about being another person. They had to go get a biography from the library, the prison library, and they had to become another character. They had to get out of their own head. And it was really funny when one of my prisoners, my students, decided to be Martha Stewart. That was just after she served time in prison. Another one decided to be J. Edgar Hoover. So it's very interesting how they picked characters to become and then write from that point of view. So the first night I'm there, I ask a question about Mark Twain. Have you read Mark Twain? And one man raises his hand and I go, I don't have a class list. I don't know who these people are. I don't know their names. And I went, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. And he goes, I'm Charlie. And I went, okay, Charlie. And we have a dialogue. And that night when I leave, the guard escorts me out. I went, you got to give me a class list. I don't know who these people are. The only one I know is Charlie. And she says, there's no Charlie in there. And I went, huh? He said his name was Charlie. She says, was he tall, thin, and blonde? I went, yeah. And she goes, that's Johnson. They only have last names. She says, do you know what a thrill he got when you said his name? I went, oh my God, he's probably dreaming about me tonight. So the next week I come in, she hands me a stack of pink index cards with their last name on it. Pink was purposely done as a symbolic. These men are getting pink cards, and they had to put the pink card with their last name on the desk, so I would always call them by their last name. It's real psychology going on in there to keep these people in check. So I noticed time went by. My class got a little smaller, They were the best students I'd ever taught in 26 years, but I say, where's Jones? He's in the hole. I went, oh, okay, I don't want to know why. And one night, I'm up there teaching, and one of the guys says, Miss, we're going into lockdown. Well, what are you talking about, we're going into lockdown? He goes, we're going into lockdown. I can hear the chatter. And I went, what? Because I always kept it turned down. I didn't want that background noise. He goes, I can hear the guards chatter on your box. At that point, the PA came on and said, lockdown, you've got 5 minutes to get into your cells. And I'm like, whoa, he was right. They were listening. They knew the tone and the pitch of the mic. So I said, okay, and we all gather our stuff up. And I walk out. I'm waiting for my escort. And the whole halls are filled with prisoners in their green outfits. It's packed. It's like being in a high school when the bell rings, you know. And I thought, it's just me and her. And these guys, if they wanted to take me hostage, I said, she didn't have a gun. And I'm standing there and I'm like, oh my God, we're in this sea of prisoners who are now going to be in lockdown. And one of the guys says to me, you better check next week. We could still be in lockdown before you come. And then I said, oh, okay. And he goes, and you be careful out there tonight. It's snowing. It's slippery. And that was it. And I really thought they really cared about me, you know? And I went through and got out just fine. So that was one of the most inspiring classes I'd ever taught. And it turned out Charlie ended up having an article written about his experience when he did get released. It was published in Adirondack Life. One of my students wrote about it. So there is an issue out there of Adirondack Life with Charlie's story in it. Thank you.
Yeah, the Adirondack Center for Writing, did you teach through the Adirondack Center? Yeah, I did too. They've been doing that program of teaching in Raybrook, at the Federal Correction, for about 15 years. So I picked up the thread about 3 years ago from Maggie and taught writing, creative writing. And I was telling Michael and Amy as we were driving down that after the first semester that I taught there, I said, what do you want me to focus on next semester? And they said, you're not going to believe this, grammar and punctuation. Has anyone ever asked you to teach them grammar and punctuation? They all wanted to learn grammar and punctuation, and I had a great time teaching it. We spent several days just talking about commas. It was very interesting. Anyway, let's see, next up. Who hasn't had a summer job? When I retired recently, I realized that I had been working, probably since about 14 when I had my first summer job. And that's how many people start entering the work life. And Pat Walsh. Is Pat here? Hi, Pat. Pat, I think, is going to talk about one or more summer jobs in her youth. Come on up, Pat.
My summer job was at Santa's Workshop, which I'm sure you've all heard of, in Wilmington, New York. I was one of Mother Hubbard's helpers, and I worked in Mother Hubbard's kitchen, which was a place where the guests could come to get lunch or get a bite to eat or an ice cream cone or a soft drink. And well, the interesting things, there were several. One was Mother Hubbard herself. There was Mother Hubbard. And she really had two personas. One was when she was out in the guest area, she would be like Mother Hubbard, and she would be talking to the kids, and she had her costume on. But she was also our boss. So in the back, in the kitchen part, this other woman came out. She was a tough boss. And it was very interesting to be with her in the kitchen when she was being our boss, but then see her interact with the guests out in the front area. The other interesting things were when Santa was busy or had to be out of town on business, there were gentlemen who were hired to fill in for him. And when I was working there were 3 of these substitute Santas. And they had to all have their own white hair and their own white beards and be on the overweight side. Because there was nothing fake. They couldn't have any fake hair or fake beards. They had to be the real thing and be rather portly. So that was kind of interesting. And you would see them, because we all had to enter through the same area to punch our time clocks, because back in those ancient times when I had summer jobs, you had to come in and put your card in the clock and get it punched on the way in and the way out. So you would see the Santas coming in and going out. And you got to see the reindeer. They were actually reindeer on the ground. You got to see them. The one downside was that after the whole summer of listening to Christmas carols every day, all day long, there were years where I just didn't want to hear Christmas carols at Christmas time. It was like, because you just, your head is so full of Christmas carols, 5 or 6 days a week that I worked all summer long. It was enough of the Christmas carols. And one of my other summer jobs was at Meadowmount Music School, which I'm sure you've all heard of, also in Lewis. And that was a great summer job for kids. I was also kitchen help and serving the food and cleaning up after the meals. And what was so neat about that is on the way into work, because you'd park far away and have to walk to the dining hall and then walk back. So no matter where you were on the grounds, you would hear the music of the students practicing. And there would be all these little buildings where they had their practice sessions, so you could hear it as you're walking along. And it was the neatest thing, because you'd hear one person playing over here, and then somebody playing a cello over here, and somebody playing a violin over here, and you'd be walking through the grounds listening to this lovely music all summer long. And I know we're not supposed to get too political, but I did have summer jobs with Senator Ron Stafford, who was senator for 30 forever. So that was interesting, traveling around the North Country with him. And the one thing about him that I found so amazing was he knew everybody in the North Country in his district. He knew everybody. He knew everybody's family. He knew where everybody worked. And he didn't have a staff person whispering in his ear. I mean, he just knew. You could walk into any room with him, and he just knew everybody, and he'd be asking them questions, how's your cousin, how's your kid, how's your grandkid? He just knew everybody and everything about them, which was really kind of neat. So those were my summer jobs. So thanks.
So I wanted to ask you about at Meadowmount, had you been exposed to classical music as a child growing up? Were you a little bit? Because that's kind of a special thing in the mountains, to have that kind of source for musical training in classical. Yeah, I just wondered if, yeah. Great, thank you. Okay. So when I first moved up here and drove through the Adirondacks, there were all these really nasty signs about something called the APA. That was in the dark days, the really dark days. And somehow the APA has survived. People who work for the APA have survived. People who hated the APA have survived. The DEC has survived. They've figured out sort of a way to work together or in collaboration. And I can't think of anyone better to tell a story about the agencies that have such an important role in the Adirondacks than Dan Plumley. Come on up.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank NCPR for this opportunity. Well, here's how it goes. I was introduced to the Adirondack Park in a rather rough manner. When at the age of 6, my father threw me and my twin brother out of the sailing boat in the middle of the South Basin of Lake George. We had those orange duck life preservers on. And my brother and I hit the water, and you know what we were thinking. Is he coming back? 200 yards away he sailed. Then, of course, he did a double tack and did a beeline back. Picked us both up in his arms as he went by. And that was our introduction to the Adirondacks. And it was a great introduction, even though Child Protective Services wasn't in place at that time. We began spending our summers on Lake George, on the islands, camping on forever wild islands in Lake George. It was a greatest way to grow up as a kid. And the Forest Preserve and Forever Wild was our playground. At 12 years of age, we sailed from our summer camping spot on Vickers Island to the eastern shore of Lake George to climb Black Mountain, which at that time had an open fire tower. And it was probably, it was my first mountain climb. It was probably my dad's last. And I'll never forget it because from the top of that fire tower, for the first time, I looked north and I looked west and I saw the Dix Mountain Range and the high peaks at 12 years of age. I was mesmerized. I can still remember my older brother Greg pulling on my arm. We have to go down, Dan. Dad, we have to go down. And all I could do was sit there and stare. By October of that year, I was headed to Keene Valley as a Boy Scout on my first trip to the high peaks, and I was hooked. Didn't have any question whatsoever in high school what I was going to do in college. Whatever I had to do, whatever degree I needed to come back and have a career in the high peaks. After 3 summers as a Lake George Park Ranger with a Bachelor's of Science degree and working on my own, raising money to lobby Congress to fight acid rain, I finally got my break, and I was hired as the Director of Park Protection for the Adirondack Council right here in Elizabethtown. And I got to live in Keene Valley and call the high peaks my home. I was 27 years old and on the top of the world. I still remember it. I lived on Adirondack Street in Keene Valley, and I got to tell my friends from other places that the power poles have trail signs going up to the garden. It was the best thing in the world. Working for the Adirondack Council was fantastic. I worked under some greats, Adirondack conservation greats, like Gary Randorf, the noted photographer. He was my first boss. We were friends his whole life. But my main boss was George Davis, previously the first planner, ecologist for the Adirondack Park Agency. He came up with the concept of the land use plan. He helped develop the initial unit management plans for the state lands. Incredible opportunity for me to work with George. And he made a commandment when he first hired me. You spend half your week out in the park learning about the wilderness and seeing the territories and being in the community. And I took advantage of that commandment as much as I could. The first week, I spent 2 nights in the Hammond Pond Wild Forest getting to know that special place right next door. And I evaluated wilderness conditions and trail conditions and looked at the draft unit management plan, and I was evaluating that plan and preparing testimony, as I did for many years, before the DEC, before the Park Agency, occasionally before the New York State legislature or committees, and even once before the U.S. Congress. The the opportunity to visit our western wilderness areas like Five Ponds, Adirondack, Pigeon Lake. I reviewed the unit management plans for Siamese Ponds and so many other wilderness areas and wild forest areas in that first year. And I also traveled to see or paddle on many of the wild, scenic, and recreational rivers in the park. We have about 90% of the state's 1,200 miles of wild and scenic and recreational rivers here, and they add so much to this territory. There was one downside after 6 years. I held on to my principles on a forest preserve issue, and we had had so much tumult over those 6 years. I had 5 different executive directors in 6 years. The board at that time was into micromanagement and got into staff hassles a lot. In any event, I stuck to my principles on a forest preserve issue in year 6, and I found out the next day that I was out of a job and on the street. So that was a rough patch, and I've had a few, as we all have, but I always remain an optimist. 2 days later, I got the call, again from George Davis. Dan, George, do you want to go to Siberia? I said, what did I do wrong? In less than a month, I was flying halfway around the world to eastern Siberia, the Lake Baikal territory, the oldest lake ecosystem in the world, 400 miles long, 70 miles wide, and 1.5 miles deep. It holds 20% of the world's fresh water, and the territory in eastern Siberia around that lake is mountains to 13,000 feet, not a flat, frozen wasteland like we all think. It was absolutely stunning, and in addition to the wildlife and the natural scenery, and of course Baikal, the area is peopled by Russians and many various indigenous peoples. Absolutely fascinating, welcoming to me, and I have led multiple exchanges, bringing them back here to the Adirondack Park. Exchanges from Baikal, 3 exchanges going back and forth with Adirondack specialists, exchanges from Tibet, exchanges from China. Last year we had 6 young people from China spend 2 weeks in the Adirondacks, and that's going to be a very exciting program. And why is that? Well, we have a model for the world. We have a model where we have protected wilderness constitutionally, the only one. And we also have a regional land use plan that covers every inch of the park. It's been an amazing place to grow up in my career. I just ended 34 years with the not-for-profit environmental advocacy side, and I've started my own consulting group called Totem Adirondack Consulting. And I'm learning and using the skills that I've learned here in the wilderness, here in the Adirondack communities, and over in Siberia. And the one lesson that I have to share is stick to your guns, be who you are, and find the best people to work with, as NCPR certainly has done. And believe me, it'll all work out. Thank you.
You know, sometimes I want to get inside people's heads, and I just want to be able to run the movie that you have going about your trip to Siberia or your various excursions all around the park. I just want to, like, get in there and see everything you saw. But thank you. Okay. Another kind of challenge, teaching and school administration. Did Gail make it? Hi, Gail. Gail Else, former superintendent, is going to tell us about working in education in this neck of the woods. Come on up.
Well, I was fortunate to be selected as the school superintendent here at Elizabethtown, Lewis, in the early 2000s, excuse me. Just seemed like 200s. So I thought I'd just share a few anecdotes. Certainly there's a very serious mission in schools for our academic programs, for our, responsibilities to the taxpayers and fundings and all sorts of crazy things. But I appreciated a few things. One thing I'll mention is that I went to undergraduate school in the Rockies in Colorado, and my father would tell you I went to ski school, but it made me appreciate that while the Rockies are pretty darn spectacular, I was like, I still love my Adirondacks, so I'm going back. And so I would say I'm a girl who likes color, and I would always dress in some crazy outfits with colored tights and things, because elementary kids really particularly like that. And so I used to wear these really bright pink tights, and there was one kindergarten child who just loved them. Every time she would see me, she would come and just hug my legs, because she just wanted to touch my legs in the pink. And so that days like that help you remember why you wanted to be superintendent, because there's some days when I would go out to my secretary and say, could you remind me why I thought I even wanted this job? Because it can be real crazy, and oftentimes people talk to you about complaints as opposed to compliments, and usually we can work our way through those things, because I don't believe there's any more emotional topic in a parent's life than their child and how things are going or not going or whatever. When I first arrived, the school had gotten new lockers, and I think I was here about 4 days and everybody went on spring break, and I walked around the building and every locker upstairs was open, and it turned out that the kids weren't shutting the lockers because they were stiff. And then a mother was concerned because somebody kept eating her kids' lunch. And I said, well, you've got to shut the locker, and you've got to not tell your 95 best friends your combination, and she'd probably have a lunch. But onward we went along. Lots of good teamwork with my fellow superintendents. Like on snow days, about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we're all calling each other to say, okay, are you going out? Are you going? Are you going? What do you think? What'd you hear from your highway people? And we go, okay, let's go. So 4 of us go, and off we went into the sunset, because I guess we always think there's safety in numbers. I always appreciated snowplows that waited for the school buses and made sure that they got home safely on those bad nights. Or I appreciated the staff that waited at school to make sure that all of our buses were checked back in and everybody was home safe and sound, and we could quit worrying about how bad the roads were that particular day. One of the things that started when towards the end of my superintendency was the Adirondack Youth Climate Summit over at the Wild Center in Tupper Lake. And we would bus pool with Schroon Lake and Keene. We'd all meet at the bottom of Spruce Hill, and off we go to Tupper to this climate summit. And I always wanted to go with our green team from our school, because I wanted the students to be able to make decisions and spend money right there on the dot and develop a plan so that they could enact it when they came back to school, and they didn't have to worry about coming back to see if we had any money to do that. And they did really wonderful programs. They came back to school very enthusiastic, and it was wonderful. And another thing that we do with our children here is we have the North Country Model UN program, but we also send a team to Harvard Model UN in Boston, and we've been doing that for years and years and years. And some of our North Country students have actually won awards at the Harvard program. And we used to carpool, or bus pool, again, with our arch rivals, Chez Z. So I had one time one of the valedictorians of our school coming to me saying, the first year we did it, I'm really worried about going on the bus with those kids from Chez Z. I thought, it's like the Cold War. We're going on the bus. And she got back, everything was fine. So, they have a different decorum, I guess, when they're off the sports field. But it's always been fun. I did about 39 years in education. I started out as an art teacher. So when I was selected for this position, my district superintendent said to me, "You are going to really love that superintendent next door," because she used to be an art teacher too, who was Cynthia Ford Johnston from Keene Valley. And we are best friends to this day. So she was right. And then she told me, "And you can only stay over there a little while, Gail, because I want you back." But I thought, oh, good luck with that, because I'm going to the Adirondacks, and goodbye, because I'm not coming back. And it's always felt like I work in a vacation, and I don't really have to, go too far. I love how it smells here, and I love all the support from the communities and the families and the kids. And the very worst of our kids is like a walk in the park compared to some other places where I've been in some other situations. And I have enjoyed practically every minute, One night I spent till about 4 o'clock in the morning working with our head of custodians and one other person, trying to make sure that the heating system, when it was about 10 below in our whole building, did not go out that night. And whatever he told me to do, I did, because that's one of the joys of being a superintendent in a small building. You can do everything. It doesn't matter what it is. If you need to answer the switchboard, or you need to, in New York State, you can get what's called an occasional bus driving certificate, and you can drive bus, a little bus, not a big one, thank God, or the van, for 30 days over the course of the year. And we had one family who lived 14 miles straight north, and then we would drop them off on the road, which was in Willsboro School District, but they lived 2 miles back in the woods, which was in our school district. So sometimes we would run short on bus drivers, so I got to drive them home. And they were always my first text on a snow day, because I did not want them going anywhere, and that's about the only way we could reach them, because they didn't really have a phone either. But, oops, the hook. Yes. Another thing that I participated in is I'm a big fan of musical theater, so we had a collaborative circumstance where the community and the school kids put on a musical theater every year. And with my background, I always painted the sets. And that was during budget season. So that was like my therapy for making a budget all day long and figuring out where I'm going to squeeze out a few more pennies. I would stay till 2 o'clock at night and paint sets in the middle of the auditorium where nobody's around, and you can play your music really loud and you can sing really poorly to it and surprise everybody with a beautiful set the next day. And I had the little Tykes wagon for my kids growing up, and I used to have all my paints in there and everything, and I'd hide it in the closet in my office during the day. And that was also fun, because that was my therapy. And I am sorry we're not doing those anymore, but maybe they'll reappear. You never know. So anyway, that's my tale. I've loved every minute of it, almost, as I said before. I'm now retired, and I wasn't sure I'd like it, but what's not to like? I resumed some of my old things and lost some of the others, and I still get to dine out with colleagues and enjoy myself. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. When you start work and you're 16 and you finally retire, what's not to like? Well put. Okay, so now someone who I relate to her story. We're going to hear from Laura Achovatte, who is a working mom. Fair enough? Working mom, come on up.
A little high. Is that good?
Yeah, just stay close.
Okay, so no disrespect to the working dads or the single dads out there, or even just any parents that, like all of us, work and have children. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. And then I recently just became a reporter and journalist with the Sun Community News. So it's a really exciting job for me. I get to learn a lot about people in the community and, you know, learn things about, I guess I'm the county girl now, so a lot about government and things that I didn't normally involve myself with very much. But I have a 15-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. So originally, my day starts with them, my day ends with them. And I wrote a little something to kind of keep my thoughts in place because my mind is always full of so many things. So I'll say that I began with this dream of writing as a young girl. And my mom worked a lot. We were poor. We were from a single mom family. And so she instilled in me the workaholic, work all the time kind of ethic, but she was never home. So I learned from her, not that she was a strong woman and all she did, she was, you know, it was really selfless, but I wanted her to be around us more. So I tried to make sure I give my all to my children. Most likely that is why I have a 15-year-old and a 3-year-old, because they each have those stages in life where I get to just give it all to them. And it's a little different now because it is a teenager and a young one. So I do have to kind of separate, but when they're small, they need their mom a lot. And I got to do that with my first one, and I get to do it again with my second one. And I should add to that the little one, you know, he's got autism, so that adds another little perspective there. But in the mornings, or actually throughout the whole day, I am just, it's like a big mess. I have so many things to remember, to do. I'll be sitting there, you know, writing, you know, doing another write-up for a story, and the little one comes in and he wants to sit, you know, beside me. He has a special laptop himself, so he can sit there and maybe watch a video or something, but he thinks he's working with mommy. So it's really nice that I get to share that with him and also show him a little bit about work, but be there with him doing that rather than my mom showing me that you always go somewhere and you're gone. So for a long time, actually, since I just recently started this job, I worked in healthcare. So I kind of followed suit with my mom for a little while. She's always on her feet. She's always working. And then I decided I didn't want to continue that in my life. And I never had considered myself a healthcare worker. I always, in my mind, was a writer. And I went back to school when my oldest one was smaller. When he entered school, I entered school. And I went back and took my time with it. And in about 2013, I graduated, you know, with my degree from Plattsburgh State and English, and still continued working in the healthcare field because the pay was a little better. But I needed to take care of my family, and just recently I decided, I saw a position open. I knew I had the skills for it. I wanted to write, and so I said, what the hey, I'm going to jump for it. If the pay's less, whatever, we'll figure it out. And I went for it. And it was the best decision I ever made in my life. And honestly, I guess things have just been happening since I decided to stop working against myself and go with what I wanted to do in my life all along. And I'm getting to do all these awesome assignments, meeting people, learning about community, and the different things that are just kind of hidden little gems that you don't, I guess, realize are there until you have to do the story and you have to dig a little deeper. And, you know, there's so many amazing things and the past presents itself, and you can see how things have unfolded over time in these little communities. So I'm guessing that throws me off. So yeah, I wanted to say that in my 36 years, there's an absolute truth. I've learned that nothing's in a timeline, that you can always get to that point that maybe you imagined in life was in a certain, 1, 2, 3, in a certain order, but it doesn't always happen that way. And my children have taught me that, there's so much more to just kind of take it back and let things flow. Don't be too serious. Don't try to push and bowl the future. You kind of live in the now and keep going. And my son, it doesn't work out when you write something, and you guys did so great. I knew I was going to kind of buck up here, but so I guess I want to say each day is just a juggling act in my own circus. That's what I wrote here. My littlest one is probably the most ferocious tiger perched on my shoulder. Some days he might be as sweet as a lamb, but more often not, he is my little buddy, my little computer buddy, like I told you. And he's my little reader. I'm just losing it, sorry. I want to say I also understand the life of a stay-at-home mom. I understand that these moms deserve their own special lives, but it's a full-time job to be just a mom, and to add the work in that mix, it's kind of a juggling act back and forth. You're not, I guess, able to keep everything all on, under, I guess that's just how I am right now. I'm losing my mind here. It's insanity. There's too many things to think about in the day. There's too many, appointments. There's too many, remembering a sippy cup or a juice cup, and, someone needs this now, and he needs this now, and, oh, I've got to get this in by 5 for the paper, and it's just so many things. And I guess I get a little nervous speaking in front of people, and I told Amy this, but there's so much between being a mom and working. And, just in one single day, it can be so much on a person. But it's also now a labor of love for me. I get to do these things that have the freedom to be a little flexible and enjoy time. And so that's that. I'm sorry. I tried to.
So when I was a working mom, I was telling Laura that when I was at work, I was guilty. I wasn't home with my kid, and when I was with my kid at home, I was guilty. I wasn't at work, and you are sort of always torn back and forth. It's tough. It is a juggling act. Next time, I want to know all the things you do in a day as a mom versus all the things you do in a day as a working journalist. Be really interested in the specifics of your work. Okay, our final scheduled presenter tonight is Reverend Minister, what's the proper? Reverend Fred Shaw. Please welcome him.
Some of you know I'm not a North Country native. I wasn't born here. I didn't grow up here. I didn't even summer here like others have. What brought me to the North Country was work. I'm the pastor of 2 churches, one in Elizabethtown, one in Lewis. They're about 4 miles apart. And that's what I do. But what I found when I came here, a lot of people have a question. What exactly does a minister do? And I can't tell you how many times I've had to answer that question. A lot of people think, well, you just work 1 hour Sunday morning. Being a minister is conducting a worship service. Well, that's not all there is to it. Yes, it's conducting worship, but it's also officiating at weddings, funerals, and other events. But really what a minister is a person who serves other people, seeks to connect with people, participate in their lives, help them, those kinds of things. And so that's what I find myself doing. I was called here to begin work in the summer. That's a terrible time to begin a job, here. You don't know how hard it was for me, sitting in my office, looking out the window at the mountains, at the trees, and I was always hearing the call of the wild, come hike me, come travel through these woods, come see this river. And I said, oh, but I got to stay here and do my job. It was a difficult time. The only upside to it was my first summer here. Of course, I didn't know a lot of people, not even a lot of people in the church. So my phone wasn't ringing off the hook all the time saying, come here, do this, do that. I felt I had to prepare for Sunday, but every once in a while I could escape into the woods. Not as often as I wanted to, but then one day the phone rang. I don't know who was on the other end of the line, but they were calling about a family member. This family member was in the hospital in Burlington, across Lake Champlain, seriously ill, most likely would die. They wanted me to go and visit this person, to comfort them, to help them. And I said, okay. So I got in my car, drove to the ferry. I get on the ferry, I'm going across the lake, and it's one of those, as they say, picture-perfect Adirondack summer day. Brilliant blue sky, puffy white clouds, warm but not unseasonably hot, low humidity, no haze. You could look up the lake, down the lake, and see everything. And that call of the wild was there. But no, I sat in my car thinking about the situation I was getting ready to face. And I had one of these manuals they give new ministers about how to make hospital visits, how to talk about death and dying. And I'm trying to read as much of this as I can in that short 20-minute crossing, really wanting to look around. The whole deck was covered with visitors, tourists, so forth, saying, oh, what a beautiful day, what a glorious lake. And I'm looking at this book, what to say when someone dies, and this is what you do. And that consumed me. But behind that thought was the thought of, I've never been to Burlington before. How am I even going to find my way around when I get there? And so I'm concentrating on all this, and I look at my side view mirror, and I can see a man get out of a car about 3 or 4 cars behind me. And I look and say, I know that guy. He's from Elizabethtown. And I look away. I say, a lot of people from town crossing the lake. Go back to reading my book. Next thing I know, this face appears in the window. It's the man I just saw. He recognized me, and he came over with a big smile on his face. He looks at me. He looks at the book I'm reading, and without me saying a word, he understands exactly what I'm doing, what I'm facing, and what's going through my head. And without addressing it directly, he says the most encouraging words possible for that situation. And it just lifts my spirits. I say, there's somebody behind me in what I'm doing. He says the few words, goes back to his car. And that was it. And as I say, being a pastor is about helping people, connecting with people, participating in their lives. Well, it's also people participating in my life. I learn so much from the people I try to serve about the work, not just the work they do, but the lives they live. And that's what people are like here. Everybody has everybody else's back. They're always willing to help, even if you're not asking for help. If you need something, they're there. They just show up. They do this, they do that. It's like that's everybody's job here, to be behind everybody else, to be a neighbor. And I've discovered that time and time again. If I feel overwhelmed with something, I know, well, there's plenty of people out there to help me, to support me. They're going through the same thing I am, perhaps doing a different job. But that's what's so beautiful about being here. So if I can't get up into the mountains, I can't do something outside I'd like to do, I know there's somebody else willing to help me do what keeps me inside, or what keeps me in the hospital, or in someone's home when they're facing some very serious issues. It's things like that which help me get through. And so I'd like to just close with another little story. As I said, I serve 2 churches. I do 2 services every Sunday. I live here in Elizabethtown, but I do my first service in Lewis. And I have ample time to get back from Lewis to E-Town before church begins here. But you know, sometimes people like to talk after church. And sometimes I'm running a little late. And sometimes I get in my car and I try to make up the difference. It's only 4 miles, it's Sunday, there's no traffic, right? So one Sunday I'm driving back to Elizabethtown. I know I'm going a little fast. I'm almost there. State trooper going the opposite direction. I said, no. And I look in my side view mirror. You know, those side view mirrors come in handy for a lot of things. And I see this trooper car doing a U-turn, turning on the lights. And I said, oh, great. And I pull over, I wait for him to arrive. Now, as I said, I'm going from one church service to another. I wear a robe when I do a service, identical to the robe that judges wear. And I have my Bible on the front seat. This guy puts his hat on. As he gets out of his vehicle, he's marching up, ready to ask the usual questions. And he leans in, just like the man on the ferry did. And he doesn't say anything. He sees the robe. He sees the Bible on the front seat. And he just shakes his head, walks away. So you see, people help each other here in the North Country. They've got your back in more ways than one. Thank you.
You know, Fred, there's a temptation to find a robe somewhere and a Bible. But I have to tell you, one time I was going into the station to do the early morning shift on a Saturday or Sunday, and I was running late. I had to be there at 6, and I was running a little late. And I was zipping into Canton, going way too fast in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. And the lights came on behind me. And the trooper stopped me and looked in the car and says, oh, Ellen, you're going way too fast. I said, I know, but I got to get to the station at 6 o'clock. He said, okay, but give yourself more time next time. So it was fine. He let me go without even a Bible. Anyone else want to share a story before we... Yes, come on up. Tell us who you are. Come on up. Andy, do you have a last name?
Victor.
Victor. Andy Victor. Welcome.
I used to travel a lot with my grandparents when I was young, 8, 9, 10 years old. It was always an education. It was an education in values, a set of values learned from people who had grown up during the Depression. And one of the values was economy. One example I can recall was traveling with them and going to a diner for breakfast and ordering a bowl of cereal and a glass of milk, and then having my grandfather put his hand on me to pause and say, watch your grandmother. She ordered a bowl of cereal, but not a glass of milk, and then ladled the milk off the cereal once or twice, each time asking for additional milk for her cereal until she had consumed, in effect, a glass of milk without any extra cost. That was the kind of lesson in economy I learned from them. That's where they came from. But the more important lesson had to do with self-reliance. And by that I mean we learned, all of us grandchildren learned not to rely on our grandparents for anything as we traveled. And the example of that I recall most vividly is when we went to Europe with my grandparents and to visit my uncle, who then lived in a small mountain village in Switzerland. And it was beautiful, but there were 4 of us, aged 15, 13, 11, and 9, and we were bored after the first day or 2 living in this farm village in Switzerland. So I convinced my grandparents that we should be allowed to take a trip on our own. The book about travel in those days was called Europe on $5 a Day. So the arrangement was made that we would travel for 3 days to a town on the other end of Switzerland where we would meet my grandparents. They were going to go 3 days hence. We could take the 3 days and get there on our own. And the first proposal was that we could have $5 a day, so $15 for the 4 of us to go. I managed to negotiate $5 a day for each of us, which helped out considerably, but it was still not enough money even in those days to feed us for the full 3 days it took to get there. So we camped out in orchards. We lived on bread and cheese and whatever fruit we could find in the fields. At one point, we even found a church and decided that the most receptive place in the town would probably be the house next to it, assuming that it was a patronage. And we bummed a meal, and in fact, an overnight at that place. The problem turned out not to be so much the lack of money as the fact that no one would pick us up, a group of 4 non-German, non-French speaking children. And so 2 days into the trip, we realized we weren't going to make it to this town where we were supposed to rendezvous with our grandparents. The only way we could make it, we decided, was to pool our money and buy train tickets for all of us. My youngest cousin, the 9-year-old, refused to give up his $15. We thought of everything we could to talk him into it. We tried terrorizing him with ideas that he would have to spend the rest of his life living this life on the road, or that he would have to learn French in order to survive, or that we would starve, and nothing would shake him out of his $15. So we had to plug on. We did finally get lucky, and we arrived in the town. Somehow in my mind, the name of the town is Rorschach, but I'm not sure whether that's the actual name of the town or just something that comes out of my state of mind at the time. But we arrived at the town, and I remember seeing it over the horizon and looking down in it and realizing that I didn't know where in the town we were supposed to meet my grandparents. And after conferring with my cousins, I realized that none of us knew. So, undeterred, we went forward and looked for the hotel in the town that looked most like the place that my grandparents would have stayed. And it was a rather run-down, shabby, economical, I should say, kind of a place. Went into the lobby, and there were my grandparents. With a sigh of relief, we thought our journey was over, but they had someplace else to go, and they suggested that we turn around and go back to the town we came from and meet them there in time to catch the plane back to New York. This time I think we talked them into a train ticket, but the train that we got arrived at the town, or at the station at the base of the town, at about midnight. It was very dark. We had a vague idea where we needed to go, and that was up. So the four of us started walking up this mountain road, a road that snaked and spiraled around for quite some time. No light except stars, which were very bright. Every now and then we would wander off the road onto a cow path and get back on again. And it took us the entire night. But finally, just before dawn, we got to the town, found the house my grandparents were in, knocked on the door. My grandparents greeted us and said, "Oh, thank goodness you're here. We're just about to leave for the airport." And to this day, I've always wondered, if I had not made it up to the top of that hill on town, what language would I be speaking today?
So I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank Aurora again for this wonderful facility. And do visit ncpr.org/work. I think you'll be quite thrilled by it. And Amy, do you have any final words you want to say before we say thank you and keep working? Thank you all.